I would like to recommend Conflict, and this is a book by Andrew Roberts and General Petraeus, covering basically all the minor wars post Second World War, really. And it's a book of two halves, although I believe, both authors worked on the manuscript entirely. But the first half seems to be largely covered by Andrew Roberts, as I say, covering these conflicts. There's great thumbnail biographies. He's particularly good on Vietnam as well, not just the military aspect, but obviously the personalities and the politics involved. And the second half then shifts in tone, style, structure, where General Petraeus was basically had a bird's eye view of Iraq and Afghanistan, and it's a great inside portrait of some of the sort of chaos and lack of planning. He's healthily critical of administrations, both Republican and Democrat, and he's kind of sympathetic towards the soldier, but also sympathetic toward the people that suffered under these regimes and campaigns.
Hello and welcome to the pod, and in this bonus episode I have a team of novelists and historians joining to chat about our favourite books of the year. We're going from the ancient world up to the war in Ukraine with plenty in between. It's a relaxed chat which also delves into current events, so please do indulge us on that. But it may be interesting to get insights from my guests. If you have any questions or comments, please do get in touch on X or email me history@aspectsofhistory.com. Please note, the recording was made on the 17th of November, so bear in mind when considering current events. A list of the books mentioned in the chat are in the show notes, as well as links to previous episodes of the pod. Do get in touch. I'm always keen to hear from listeners, but until then I'm going to hand you over to me introducing Aspects of History's Books of the Year. Welcome to the Aspects of History 2023 Books of the Year podcast. And for those listeners who were here with us 6 months ago when we did our sort of halfway, it's the same guests again. So we have distinguished historians, authors, writers with us. So I'll run through who our panel members are today, listeners. It is Roger Moorhouse, distinguished, acclaimed historian.
All of those.
We have Antonia Senior, a novelist and the Times historical fiction reviewer.
Right, yep, that's me.
And Richard Foreman, novelist, publisher, prolific, best-selling publisher. Richard Foreman.
Thank you. Did any of the other panel pick up how disappointed he said when the same people are here?
Yeah, there was a whiff of that.
Well, as before, listeners, there have been a few drinks consumed, so that might be why people laughed along to that very unfunny comment. So we're going to kick off with our books of the year, and I'm going to start. And listeners, you may have listened to previous episodes with some of the authors here, and some of the authors have not appeared on the podcast. But what we decided to do was to have a nice informal chat where we're all going to talk about the books that we really enjoyed 2023. And I'm going to start with a book that came out in September. The book is called One Fine Day, written by Matthew Parker. It's One Fine Day. It's about it's an account of one day when the British Empire reached its territorial extent, which was the 29th of September. The greatest territorial extent. Thank you, Roger. Yes, Roger, you're quite right. Greatest territorial extent, 29th of September 1923, which, topically, it's the British Mandate of Palestine. But what I'd like to say about this book, and the reason why I thought it was I was so impressed by it, is that it really does. It picks this one day, but it covers the whole empire, and so it's sort of an extraordinary achievement because it looks at both the colonized, the colonizers. It's not judgy in any way. It just looks at it impartially, and that's what I love. I don't really. I suspect I know what Matthew thinks about the Empire, but I didn't know that from having read the book, and so it gives a voice to, I think, people who didn't really have a voice before in that period of the Empire, and there's some just fascinating stories coming out of it. I mean, in particular, the one part I love was him looking at Malaya, and I talked to him about this. I'm a big fan of Somerset Maugham, and Somerset Maugham travels to Malaya and stays with a lot of these planters, and it's just he looks at it from Somerset Maugham point of view, the subjects of Somerset Maugham's novels, but also the Malayans themselves, and it just gives a really rounded picture. If I just picked one country in the Empire that was hugely economically important to the British Empire at the time,
I think it's an absolutely wonderful premise. I'll give him that. I think it's the idea behind it. I remember talking to him. It must have been. It's been quite a few years in the production. This one, hasn't it? Something like I feel like
8 years. I think
1 decade.
I was going to say 7 years, but yeah, so something like that. I remember talking to him a long time ago, where I think he just had the idea or he just signed it or whatever. But I remember thinking, well, that's a brilliant idea for a book, and I'm delighted to see it out and doing so well.
And doesn't it start with sort of sunrise in one bit and then move across to sunset in another bit of the Empire? Isn't that way?
It does, but not so. It's not so rigid because it does sort of it goes forward and back in time, so it isn't sort of rigidly sticking to the as you know, like the sun rising and setting in the British Empire. But he makes a lot of use of the newspaper articles of the time, which gives a fascinating. He was saying even the adverts tell you something in the newspapers.
Yeah.
It was a little bit delayed because of COVID. The library was no longer open, and that was almost his office. I saw him there a few times.
Yeah. So okay, that was mine. I've done one for me. So why don't we go to my left, Antonia Senior?
Well, as we were just mentioned, Palestine. One of my books of the year. It is kind of quite topical. It's a book called Adama by a writer called Lavi Tidhar, and I apologise for my my Hebrew pronunciation such as it is, but apparently so the title comes from a Hebrew proverb that says, without Adama, which means earth or land, you can't have Adama without dam, which means blood, and that's at the root of this book, which starts with a woman called Ruth at the end of the Second World War, who's trying to build a kibbutz in what is then Palestine, and she has this vision of a kind of agrarian socialist paradise, and then it kind of covers 4 generations of her family as that vision gets engulfed by violence and kind of becomes hollowed out by kind of realism. And it's an absolutely brilliant, it's a massive book. It's one of a loose trilogy, and this is the second book in the trilogy, and I urge you to go and read them all, because I think in a moment where global politics is sort of full of people who are very noisy, and this book reminds us that actually if there's a difficult question, there are no easy answers, and at the root of all of these conflicts there are individual characters who are just trying to live their lives as best they can, and I think it's very, very, very worth reading, and a wonderful book in its own right. I know I'm not encouraging you read it just because of the recent events, but it certainly gives it a kind of moral edge. So yeah, that's my first one, Adama by Lavi Tidhar. Massive recommendation.
I think it's funny how the whole idea of kibbutz and the kibbutzim or kibbutzniks is sort of back in the public consciousness in a way. It was something I remember from growing up, in the 70s and 80s. It was a thing then. And it was like it was often sort of portrayed almost as like a sort of the socialist paradise, that's what they were trying to create and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And ironically, a lot of those in the kibbutzes, I know I'm sure that's the wrong word, but in the kibbutzes that were destroyed on the 7th of October, a lot of those inhabitants of those kibbutzes were very left-wing and were very pro-Palestinian to a large extent. So it's kind of ironic that they were the ones that bore the brunt of that attack by Hamas. So, but it's interesting that they're sort of back in the news in that way, because it's a word that I certainly hadn't really, heard for a long time.
What they have it's they sort of cross-fertilised it, did they not, with the idea of just settlements? So the word almost sort of developed, but now because it's in the news, it's prevalent again, I guess. Yeah.
But then I think that's because there's the settlers and the kibbutzim are a slightly different thing, aren't they? I mean, we're straying into territory that's a bit far away from what I'm comfortable talking about. But the original kibbutzim, as Roger said, had this. What we've forgotten is an incredibly utopian, left-wing, socialist, agrarian-based Marxist view of what could be created in the desert,
and communal living.
Or the children were in communal nurseries. And this is one of the kind of really interesting things in the book, because one of the characters in it is a boy who was basically brought up in a communal nursery in a kibbutz and just wanted his mum, right? So it's the idea that is very present in the book that ideologies have their limits, and actually, humans versus ideologies, humans tend to lose, I guess. That's
a lovely point.
Thank you.
No, it's true.
No, but it's an excellent book, so I really recommend that. Yes, so go read it.
Great stuff. Roger.
Okay. Well, my next pick actually also has obliquely a sort of Palestinian element to it, but it's Daniel Finkelstein's Hitler, Stalin, Mum and Dad, which is his, if you like, sort of dual biography of both of his parents and their life stories. And it's beautifully written, as you'd expect, given that Daniel Finkelstein, writes for the Times every week, and that's his background, is primarily as a journalist, political journalist. But it actually illustrates an area of history that I've worked in a lot, to some extent, sort of Polish history, Central European history, and brings that to a whole new audience, which you just have to applaud. Sometimes you just have to say that, a book like that comes along and it does it very well, and it reaches a very wide audience, and in the process, we would hope, brings new tranches of readers to other people writing in the field. So the two branches of the family, there's the Wiener family, who are German Jews, who left Germany after Hitler came to power in 1933. They went to Holland. The Wiener's two daughters there that grew up in quite close proximity to Anne Frank, for example, in Amsterdam. And the Wiener side, Alfred Wiener became the founder of the Wiener Library in London, which is very well known. He was a great pioneer of sort of collecting evidence of the misdeeds of the Nazis, and that's what became the basis of the Wiener Library. But he was out of the country when the Germans invaded in 1940, so his wife and two children were left in Holland, were subsequently caught up in the ongoing sort of persecution of the Jews that leads to the Holocaust, and they survive remarkably on forged Paraguayan passports, which a story which coincides, of course, with my recent book, The Forgers. But that's not why I recommend it. It is beautifully done. So on that side, you've got the Wiener side survive on these Paraguayan passports. The Finkelstein side, which comes from eastern Poland, comes from Lwów in Poland, suffers the other element of sort of the Central European Jewish experience, which is deportation to Siberia and Kazakhstan by Stalin. So hence the title Hitler, Stalin, Mum and Dad. And in the process, they spend something like 2 years in Siberia and Kazakhstan, and then are brought back west by a long circuitous route with the Anders Army through Palestine and everything else. And it's an absolutely fascinating.
Richard.
Hello, everyone. Now, instead of The Devil's Alliance, I would like to recommend Conflict. And this is a book by Andrew Roberts and General Petraeus, covering basically all the minor wars post-Second World War, really. And it's a book of two halves, although I believe, both authors worked on the sort of manuscript entirely, but the first half seems to be largely covered by Andrew Roberts, as I say, covering these kind of conflicts. There's great kind of thumbnail biographies. He's particularly good on Vietnam as well, not just the military aspect, but obviously the personalities and the politics involved. And the second half then shifts kind of in tone, style, structure, where General Petraeus was basically had a bird's eye view of Iraq and Afghanistan, and it's a great inside portrait of, I don't know, some of the sort of chaos and lack of planning. He's healthily critical of administrations, both Republican and Democrat, and he's kind of sympathetic towards the soldier, but also sympathetic towards kind of the people that suffered under these kind of regimes and campaigns. And I believe, Ollie, you've read this as well.
I have. I loved it, actually. And it doesn't just cover the minor conflicts post-war. Pretty much, there are a few it's not mentioned, but there are major. Vietnam War was a major conflict, and then of course Ukraine. But the Vietnam War, you're absolutely right to bring that one up. It's absolutely fascinating reading a master of counterinsurgency talking about a war that did not really get to grips with the counterinsurgency as well as it perhaps could have. I think it's something that war, the Vietnam War, is interesting to me because I think it's something that is in the deep core, the sort of the heart of many Americans, and it's something that many of us don't really appreciate. And so to read Petraeus' account of the Vietnam War, which is obviously clearly a conflict that is taught at West Point and many other academies, of what one would imagine how not to do a war like that, and remains to be seen whether we'll see anything like that again. But what I loved about the Vietnam War episode, and I'm sounding like I'm slightly obsessed with the Vietnam aspect of it, but Petraeus writes about the Marine Corps had actually nailed how to do the counterinsurgency in Vietnam, as opposed to Westmoreland and his and the US Army. And so I find that really interesting because it speaks very much to Petraeus' approach to Iraq and Afghanistan, where his surge approach had great success. And then, of course, it's always interesting to hear Petraeus on current events.
No, he talks with his... obviously he's got natural authority, but he's actually an incredibly talented writer as well. His job is to communicate, and he does that incredibly well.
He does indeed. I don't know if either of you have...
I think Andrew Roberts is always worth reading, whatever he writes, to be honest. I think he's a fantastic historian. Anything I'd say, I was mentioning Vietnam there, and you mentioned Ukraine as well. It was interesting. On another podcast a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about the casualty figures, Russian casualty figures in Ukraine. And it looks like, the figures are not entirely clear, it's a bit of a guess, but it looks like they're up, the death rate, or the death figure for Russian soldiers is up above 100,000. Which is an astonishing figure.
That's more than the Russians lost during the 10-year war in Afghanistan.
You might really rephrase that, because it's more than the Americans lost in 10 years, which is my point. So that's more than the Americans lost in a decade in Vietnam. That figure's about, I think, 70,000, something like that.
Yeah, they lost 58,000.
Right, okay, so 60,000, sorry. But, that shows you that.
Yeah, but the Soviets in Afghanistan... It's more than the Soviets lost in a 10-year conflict in Afghanistan,
which is often called their Vietnam.
Yeah, exactly. But that's in 18 months of warfare. The Russians have lost, by that estimate, 100,000 people. And you said at the top there, the effect that the Vietnam War has had on American society and the American psyche, or American politics. We can only guess. Obviously it's a different situation. Russia isn't a democracy, all the rest of it, but there has to be a point at which those figures have a knock-on effect on Russian society and then on Russian politics. So we're kind of waiting to see what that's going to be. It might be even uglier than what we've already got.
Yeah, we always assume that if Putin falls, there'll be someone better for us.
Yeah. No,
well, even that America needed a win after Vietnam, and there was some sort of small insurgencies, counterinsurgencies in the 80s and under Reagan, where and obviously they kind of won the Cold War, but that's up for debate. But they will be looking to restore pride, even if it's they're trying to do it in Ukraine, but someone else could suffer because of that as well.
Yeah,
in the region.
I misunderstood you there. Sorry, when you were talking about Afghanistan. No, I'm just.
Right. No props.
Because I thought you would. So do we need?
Many people misunderstand me. Now I will. I can re-edit. It could all be re-edited. It's not going out live. I go back and listen to it back, and then I remove.
Cut it.
I remove any insults to me. All your ums remain in. Mine get removed.
Yours are all, so you're just perfect.
Yeah.
The rest of us are blue.
Everyone goes, God, who are these idiots he's got?
Why are you stooping to deal with these critics?
Yes, I know. Right. So I think we've all done our first book. So I guess this sets a trend. So we'll just keep on going a book each. And my next one takes us back into the dark ages of the ancient world, and so my next book of the year is Homer and his Iliad, written by Robin Lane Fox. And for those particularly sensitive, may have detected a theme in the title of the book, which is Homer and his Iliad, i.e. there has been some kind of debate over whether Homer was a man, a series of people. Some have suggested Homer could have been a woman, but Robin Lane Fox in his book has firmly put his colours to the mast. Homer was a man writing in the 8th century, which is a little bit earlier, in the early 8th century, I think he writes in the book. So it's a little bit earlier than many other scholars have written about. But this book, I picked this because I absolutely, of all the ancient authors, Homer's is certainly my favourite, and the Iliad and the Odyssey, the Iliad would be the one I would take to a desert island. And I took it to my version of a desert island when I went for my year out, when I was an archaeologist in Central America. And it was very special to me because I'd read it when I was at an impressionable age. And so reading this book that Lane Fox, who's a very distinguished ancient historian, he wrote brilliant biography of Alexander the Great and has written many great books. And this book, I think, really captures, for those who love the Iliad, which I do, it's just the assessment from someone who just really knows what he's talking about. And just to read it is just a great joy.
I think everybody is either Iliad or Odyssey, aren't they? I mean, I'm Iliad, definitely, so I'm going to have to read this.
I'm the Aeneid.
Oh, you're always a contrarian.
Now, that's definitely getting edited out. No one can be for the Aeneid.
No, I do think there's plagiarism in that, though. I think you're either someone who is drawn to the Odyssey or you're drawn to the Iliad, and I think I'm absolutely in your camp on this one, Ollie.
Well, the other thing
to read this.
The other thing I wanted to mention was, as you're reading it, because obviously it's written about a hugely traumatic war amongst two different groups of people, and you do. At the beginning of the book, there's an opening quote which is from Oliver Stone, who himself fought in Vietnam and who Robin Lane Fox knows through work in Hollywood. But you do think of contemporary wars and the war in Ukraine. There's a huge amount of pathos in the Iliad and fury, all sorts of emotions are stirred in the Iliad, and it does make you think of contemporary events as well, which is why I think it's a very relevant book for it to be published, and it is a fantastic book to read, and I couldn't recommend it enough, really.
Well, I'm sold. It's on my list for Christmas. Please, Santa, if you're listening.
Antonia, what was on your other? You must have read it, so it won't be on your list. What could it be on our lists?
Well, so I want to talk about Elodie Harper's Temple of Fortuna, which is the third and concluding book in her trilogy about Amara, who is a prostitute in ancient Pompeii. So we're continuing the ancient theme. I think it's one of the best historical trilogies I've read ever. I think it's wonderful. I think it's completely immersive. It puts you right in there. If where you want to be, you're just looking at me suspiciously. If where you want to be is a brothel in Pompeii, you're right in the middle of the action. No, it's a wonderful book. I was worried for her because it felt a bit like when you were reading the third book in the Hilary Mantel trilogy, that you know the ending, right? There's no spoiler alerts here. You knew that Cromwell was going to die. With Elodie Harper's book, you know that Pompeii is going to get obliterated by Vesuvius. So your question mark is, I know it's going to happen as the reader, you know it's going to happen as the writer. Can you pull this off? And the answer is yes, she pulled it off completely triumphantly. The last, fictional take on Pompeii I read was Robert Harris's Pompeii, which is 10 years ago more, which I thought was, and I'm a big Robert Harris fan, I thought that was distinctly average. Elodie absolutely smashes it. It's completely brilliant. You are with them all the way as the burning rocks rain upon their heads and the sun is blotted out, and Pompey, the admiral is not Pompey. What's his name? Pliny, the admiral, is kind of lying on the floor, like sort of, I just can't tell you how good it is, and I urge you all to read the book. And I took my kids to Pompeii in October, just gone, and I felt
half term. You didn't take them out of school.
No, half term, obviously, darling. No, I didn't take them out of school, even for classical education purposes. And I felt like with Elodie's kind of works in my back pocket, it gave everything a kind of useful perspective, and I thank her for that. She's great.
Is this the third in a trilogy?
It's the third in the trilogy. Absolutely fantastic, and I really recommend it. I mean, I'm looking around at my fellow panellists, thinking not many of you have read a trilogy about a Roman prostitute. I promise you'd like it, and it has a wonderful. This one has a fantastic cameo from Domitian, the kind of evilest of the emperors. It's brilliant.
I think a book about a Roman prostitute, she was always going to pull it off.
She did.
I must defend Robert Harris's Pompeii book. I thought was excellent, better than his other Roman books. The Earth Moved.
Oh, you don't like the Cicero ones?
I think the first Cicero book is excellent, but then they turned into hagiographies.
Wow, controversial. I thought the Cicero books were really good. I agree with you, they get weaker, but I thought his Pompeii book, sorry Robert Harris, I love you, but it was my least favourite of all your books. I just thought it was a bit meh. And how you can be meh if you're doing one of the most important kind of corruptions of all time. And Elodie Harper's version is not meh. And the thing I love about her as well, she's entirely unsentimental. So, love doesn't conquer all. She's brilliant. Anyway, read it.
Great stuff. Roger.
Right, I'm going to shamelessly drag us back to the 20th century, which is my stomping ground, but I am talking about the last book of a trilogy, so there is a beautiful symmetry there to our previous pick of Antonia. So my next book is Frank McDonough's The Weimar Years, The History of the Weimar Republic, 1918 to 33. Frank is a former academic, now retired. He's spent many decades in academia up in the John Moores University in Liverpool, has become one of the nation's authorities on the Third Reich. If you've seen any of those sort of documentaries on television or the wilder reaches of satellite television, you've probably seen Frank. If you've seen a Scouser talking about Hitler, you've probably seen Frank. And he's he really knows his stuff. He writes very, very well. Really accessible. very thoroughgoing, and he brings all of those sort of years of scholarship to bear in this trilogy. And the last one, it kind of, to some extent, it went backwards. He did the Hitler years, he did the war years, and now it's the Weimar years. So he's just kind of talking about the run-up to Hitler's seizure of power in 1933 and the reasons for the failure of Weimar. And of course, what was good about Weimar, which is certainly in his opinion, and I think it's justifiable. There are some great positives in Weimar that tend to get forgotten in the sort of rush to damn that particular political system and that republic because of what it ultimately gave birth to. And he makes the point as well that there are sort of more fundamental failings, perhaps, as a certain lack of belief in democracy and the democratic system. I mean, my argument always on the fall of Weimar is that it's primarily economics. It's that sort of old, Clinton argument that it's the economy stupid. I think that's the primary reason. I think his view is a bit more nuanced than that, which is fair enough. But he brings all of that scholarship to bear, beautifully illustrated, beautifully written volume, and yeah, absolutely deserves to be on that list.
Was that your favourite part of the book?
My favourite part of the book is when you talk about 1923. So 100 years ago, almost to the day that we're talking. If you start talking about the hyperinflation, 1923 is a really, really important year. And I actually, in the previous session that we had 6 months ago, I talked about Mark Jones's book 1923, which is fantastic, which looks at that year in isolation. Frank writes about 1923 in this book with great aplomb and using lots of lovely original sources, and it's such a turning point as well, because that was, it could have been a very, very short-lived experiment.
I mean, I think it's my favourite part of the book as well. Push.
Oh, very good, very good. I hope listeners got that.
Well, I didn't get it.
Push.
Wow.
Very good, very good.
Wow.
Sometimes
really brainy.
I hope Frank would get that.
I didn't hear it. I thought he said push.
Well, it was a mixture.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned Mark Jones's 1923. I know it's not on our list to talk about, but he wrote for us, and his book, I know you are a big fan of, Roger. In fact, it was off the back of our chat halfway through the year that I got in touch with him to get.
Yeah, I know. I mean, that's another great book. I mean, that's, again, I have to say, I mean, Frank falls into the same category. Frank now retired, but Mark Jones, I have to preface this by saying, for an academic, he writes really well. I mean, academics almost have writing skill thrashed out of them, let's be honest, by the rigours of writing for academia, and Mark writes really, really well. So, I know that's probably damning with faint praise, but
it is, but we're all for that. Richard.
Well, I was about to talk about Spies by Corder Wharton, but I've just been slid a piece of paper to say mention The Forgers by Roger Moorhouse, and I'll let the listeners guess who has slid me that piece of paper. But I know we touched upon The Forgers in the previous half of the year, but that was actually when the book before it came out. And obviously it came out, I think, around mid-August. Came out to rave reviews, lovely sales, and most of us around this table have read, kind of enjoyed the book. But it does now kind of unwittingly and depressingly contain more relevance with what's going on. I mean, obviously in Israel, but also, I would argue, far more in this country, where a fair few people need to be educated about the Holocaust. Those people who kind of bandy around the word, Nazi, Holocaust, and make these kind of false comparisons. So for that reason alone, I'd kind of recommend The Forgers as a book that obviously is about some decent and efficient civil servants and bureaucrats. On that alone, they're unicorns almost. But it's just incredibly, just the portrait of the Holocaust. And I think I've even said to Roger, I think one day he should write a history of the Holocaust, and hopefully there's some publishers out there will give him a load of money to do so, because it will be a great book. But this book does touch upon sort of some general lessons of the Holocaust, which are resonating at the moment, about the indifference of some people. The old sort of enemy and disease of anti-Semitism was prevalent then, and unfortunately it's depressingly prevalent now. So if there are anyone perhaps tempted to go on a march soon and sort of in one hand hold a kind of terrorist sympathiser's hand and in the other an ill-judged placard, you may want to read Roger's book, because it will give you a slight education.
I couldn't agree more with Richard there. Sorry. I mean, this isn't a blow smoke up Roger's arse session, but it is a wonderful book. And the revelation to me reading it was I hadn't, I think, appreciated the fact that the Holocaust was so legalistic and bureaucratic. Like, this was not something that I had really kind of understood, that evil could be so sort of, paper and pen based. I guess one had, you have this sort of like notion maybe that it's a sort of, almost organic, because that makes it better. But no, it's the fact that it was so legalistic, and I thought that was so interesting. And actually, just picking up on one of the earlier books that we've talked about, Danny Finkelstein wrote a column in the newspaper where he talked about the fact that his family had originally been not Zionist, and then World War II happened, and one of the camps was liberated, and I can't remember which, and I'm sorry for that, but one of the camps was liberated, and the Allied soldier liberating it said, "You're free to go," and the Jewish prisoner said, "Where do we go?" Right? And I just think you can't, like, every single time you have an opinion about what's happening now in the Middle East, just remember that guy in the fucking striped pajamas saying, "Where do we go?" That's, and I think we get that point very strongly from Roger's book, The Forgers, as well as obviously Danny's book about his family. And I think it's important to read some books right now.
I think that's absolutely right. Thanks, guys. That's very kind. But I think one of the reasons behind where we are at the moment with this sort of recrudescence of anti-Semitism, particularly among the young in Western countries, I think is in part because there's been a collective forgetting about the Holocaust. In spite of all of that, being on the school curriculum and all the rest of it as it has been, I think it's sort of slipped from public memory to a large extent. It was very much, the intellectual furniture for us growing up. And I think it's a little bit slipped from memory. It seems like ancient history to our
Do you think that's
generation of
inevitable
youth.
in one sense, though? Because, genocides of history have not, for our generation, who are a bit older than a lot of the people marching, right? For our generation, genocides of history are not the same as the Holocaust. We can maybe even joke about them, right? But the Holocaust holds a special place in the kind of pantheon of horror, right? But maybe that's just a function of the fact that we're of a certain age and there were survivors and it was talked about and it was an issue. I mean, maybe it's just, part of time passing, that it becomes, and I hate to say, even saying it makes me feel slightly ill, but it becomes just another genocide.
I think also it's manifested itself in a different way, in a sense, since the 1930s and post-war, where it's been a disease largely, but not exclusively, propagated by sections of the left, which is slightly different.
Anti-Semitism?
Yeah. And that's probably been a bit problematic for certain, I don't know, you might call them academic bodies, institutions, where they're perhaps wrestling with things that they shouldn't.
Yeah, I think that's right, and it's an extraordinary thing that we're all looking at now, isn't it? Where we see people siding with forces of anti-Semitism that we thought were dead,
Mm.
and they're alive and marching down the streets towards Whitehall, and it's extraordinary.
So I agree with everything you're saying, but one thing I would say is that I looked at social media and saw these marches and you know, on social media, and would completely agree, yes, it's littered with anti-Semitism. But I did actually go down to Vauxhall Bridge last Saturday, and I was uncomfortable with the march even happening. But I did go down to have a look, just because I didn't want to get all the information off the dreaded social media. And listeners know my view on that. But I didn't. There were chants of from the river to the sea, which I would guesstimate at around 10%, which is too much. But for the many of the people who I did see, a lot of them were, you know, most of them, the vast majority were very peaceful, and it was very chilled out. And so I can only say what I saw. I think a lot of them are misguided.
And I would 100% support their right to march, because I support freedom of speech, but I also support my right to think that it's a dick move.
Yeah, no, I get that completely. All I'm saying is that if one gets your news from social media, you will assume that the majority are raging as anti-Semites, and that I think there are a lot on these marches. I just don't think it's the majority.
I found it incredibly difficult to separate the cretins from the ignorant.
Yeah, I think that's right, but I do think it's also incumbent on us, those of us who are deeply worried about anti-Semitism, to also, you know, pause and think about the fact that there are also quite a lot of Palestinians who don't want to be dictated to by Hamas, who are having a fucking terrible time as well.
And we have to acknowledge the large number of civilians being killed.
Right, and this is one of the reasons why I put forward the book that I did, but that the idea that there are any simple solutions to this is insane. And it is difficult and intractable, and one of the problems of our time. And maybe me saying that and not having a solution, or not even pretending to have a solution, is a cop-out. But I think it's more honest than anybody who pretends that this can be solved by a ceasefire or by eradicating Hamas. Because, you know, you eradicate Hamas and you create a million other Hamases. I mean, it's not... Well, these things are impossible.
Yeah, I mean, I have
You can't kill an idea with bombs and guns.
I mean, I've got many problems from a sort of, you know, military or strategic or whatever. I'm not a general, of course, but I've got a lot of problems with what Israel's doing, because you're just going to create more terrorists. And even physically, you're building sniper holes and a Stalingrad for Israeli forces.
Warfare like that is perfect for, you know, asymmetric warfare, which is what they want. I mean, effectively.
Yeah.
But isn't this one of those situations where you're fucking glad you're an armchair general and not a real general? Because what are you supposed to do? Yeah. You let them keep the hostages and get away with it? No. Will you go in? No. Like, so what do you do?
Well, they're going to have to try and, a bit going back to some of the lessons of conflict of Petraeus and Roberts, and it is that old cliche of to try and win hearts and minds. Yeah. But I think that's, you know, one of the most incredibly difficult parts of the world to do that. I mean, nothing's impossible, but it's knocking on the door of it.
I fear that ship sailed. I think the hearts and minds thing's not possible.
Well, as a long-term solution.
Maybe. Yeah. I you know, if you're going to talk about ceasefire, then, which I just don't think is realistic. I haven't heard anyone, or maybe there are some, but I haven't heard anyone calling for ceasefire mentioning release the hostages, and that could be a first step. But I haven't heard anyone suggest that.
You know, it's got to be the starting point for any Israeli bargaining position, hasn't it? Release the hostages. They're babies.
Yeah, anyway, but do we hear that in the parliamentary motion that did not get passed in Parliament?
Yeah,
we didn't.
No.
I mean, one thing to bring it back to some books as well, in terms of, you know, the story of the region and what's going on now. It's obviously completely intertwined with history. So I would urge people, if they haven't already, because it's sold God knows how many copies, to read Jerusalem by Simon Sebag Montefiore.
Yeah, good call. Yeah.
And I did a special podcast on Israel-Palestine, which has had some positive comments. So
there you go.
If you're not,
the conflict is all about Oliver Webcott.
It's listeners, Richard, and learn a little bit more before delivering emphatic statements.
Here.
Right, moving on. from that. Can we pick something slightly more positive? Let me see. What do we have on our
I've got
list?
something really disgusting.
When you say disgusting,
It's not a rash.
okay, not a rash. Great. Go with that.
My book of the year that I picked for the Times, and I'm going to double it up here, is a book called The Glutton by A.K. Blakemore. It's a weird, batshit, extraordinary, brilliant book about... I know I'm doing a lot of swearing. Roger's whispering. I'm doing a lot of swearing. Sorry, listeners. You can Ollie can edit it out. I mean, as she chooses.
I can put an explicit marker on the podcast. Then it doesn't get cancelled. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe I should just try to swear less. Note to self. Anyway, so the book is about a performing glutton in the French Revolutionary eras, and this is based on a real character called Tarare. I don't know how to say it. Who basically eats anything and everything, and when we meet him, he's dying in a hospital bed because he ate a really big fork. And then he's telling his story.
There used to be a guy called Monsieur Mange-Tout, who was, like, recently, he used to be on television.
Right.
He used to literally eat, like, a chandelier.
Yeah, no, so this is what this guy does, but it's like more
So it
evolving
actually
than
has
that.
a tradition.
Yeah,
That's
and
crazy.
so A.K. Blakemore is a poet, and it's the most beautifully written. Honestly, it's incredible. The imagery she uses. So the one that sticks in my mind is when the young Tarare discovers he has a talent for eating everything. He's in a bar, and somebody throws a dead rat at his feet, and this giant dead rat sits there, and everybody's like, "Eat the rat, eat the rat." So he just like opens up his gullet. And in A.K. Blackmore's description, she says the dry peppercorn eyes of the rat watch the boy as he opens up his gullet and like I can't remember the rest of it, but it was just the dry peppercorn eyes of the rat, and then he sort of crunches down this rat and eats it, and the whole audience is like throwing up and like cheering, and it's this incredible exploration of how humans are both revolted and delighted by disgusting things. It's so weird, so bonkers, and so utterly brilliant. I was just blown away by this book.
If there are any children listening, please don't eat a fork. It's the proper thing to do.
It is the proper thing to do. If you want to eat a rat, by all means.
I remember reading in the 90s about a guy who ate an airplane, but...
Yeah, that was the same guy.
Oh.
Yeah, surely, Mr. Mange-Tout.
Oh, right. Yeah, well, this sounds like really...
They got him on when Uri Geller was busy.
I'm,
The lizards.
but I'm definitely going to get that for a family member for Christmas, I think. Because there's someone in particular I think would enjoy that. He describes himself as a hedonist. So perhaps he needs some...
There's the limits of your hedonism. Right?
Yes, exactly.
I mean, I can't quite... If any of you have read Patrick Susskind's Perfume, it's slightly resonant of that. It's the way she gets across both the kind of disgustingness and the beauty of being human is an incredible thing. I'm back to the rash now that I don't have.
Yeah. I'm quite tempted by that.
It's
The way
so
you've sold that, I think that was brilliant.
Yeah, she's awesome. I feel a bit guilty because obviously, as I say, I do review historical fiction for the Times, and her first book was about witches, and I kind of swerved it because I'd read so many books about witches, and then I realised afterwards that I'd made a mistake because it was a very good book, and I read it later. And this one is absolutely brilliant, and I think she's an absolute star. I think she's going to go all the way. She's the real deal.
Great stuff. So, I think Roger.
Yes. Back to the 20th century.
Are you astonished?
Funny, all three
Surprising.
listeners, all three choices, if you haven't picked up, 20th century.
20th century, Central Europe.
Involving Second World War or pre-Second World War.
Pre-Second World. So the last
What range?
one for me, the last one for me is Anna Reid, A Nasty Little War, it's called, which is about the Allied intervention at the end of the Russian Revolution. So for those that don't know, the Allies collectively, that's the British, the French, the Americans, the Japanese, invade in various places across from Vladivostok to Archangel to the Caucasus, to try and, as Churchill put it, strangle the Bolshevik baby in its crib, which is such a hideously lovely line.
It's just so Churchill.
It's
It's
a bit of a
wonderful.
shame he didn't manage to strangle the ball.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's
Was Churchill the driver behind the British intervention?
to some extent, I suppose. It was bigger than Churchill, but I think he was probably one of the drivers there. Yeah, but what's interesting about it is a number of things. The first thing is that the Western powers collectively were pretty much tired of war by 1919, 1920. Right, they were kind of done. So there's this sense of sort of ennui that comes across in the book, and by the way, it's beautifully written. It's absolutely beautifully written. So this sense of ennui and just kind of, to some extent going through the motions and being corrupted by being in, revolutionary Russia, which was a kind of a mess of a place, already prior to the revolution. So there's all sorts of elements where they just can't be doing this anymore. And yet they're trying to defeat the Bolsheviks. So there's all of that element to it, and then I think crucially, this plays into an element which comes back to the present day, which is that we talk a lot, or Russia talks a lot now about this fear of encirclement and its fear of Western intervention and Western invasion, and the rest of the world looking out says, well, hang on, you're the aggressor here, you're the ones that have invaded Ukraine. But this is because it's so ingrained in the Russian mentality that they are the victims. And it goes back to a large extent to that episode of the Allied intervention. So this is actually a really crucial moment, a crucial episode in the creation, if you like, we can call it, of the Russian psyche, of how Russia sees the world and how Russia in particular sees the Western world. So it's really important in that respect to how we view today and how Russia views the war in Ukraine and everything else. So that's really pertinent, but it's just a beautifully written, beautifully well-researched history book, and I really recommend it.
Yeah, it's interesting because when you add into the fact that they lost 20 odd million in the Second World War, or more?
Yeah, more. Yeah.
Oh.
More?
Well, 25 is conservative, is it not?
Yeah, that we have to be careful with those figures, because this is I could go on. Russia, the state of Russia now, the Russian Federation, has kind of taken the mantle of the Soviet Union. The figure of whatever it was, 26 million war dead, was a Soviet figure, was the Soviet Union, it wasn't Russia, right? The vast majority of those were non-Russians. So Russia has kind of, by sleight of hand, because it's set itself up, the Russian Federation sets itself up as the successor state to the Soviet Union, it's kind of taken the mantle of those 26 million, however many it was, war dead, and said those were ours, those were Russians. They weren't Russians, right? At least 8 million of those were Ukrainians. They're also Balts, they're also Belarusians, they're Georgians, every other nation under the sun within the Russian Federation and beyond. So we have to be careful of that sleight of hand, because Putin's regime is quite happy to say, 26 million Russian war dead, and to instrumentalise that and use it as a weapon. It's simply not true. So
Yes.
we have to be very careful with that.
A very important distinction. Thank you, Roger.
I can't wait to read that book, because I've been completely obsessed with the Allies' intervention in the Russian Civil War since. Do you guys know about Derek Robinson, who's like the best writer of historical fiction of the 20th century?
Is he the ex-pilot?
Yeah. Well, he was...
Piece of Cake?
Yes, Piece of Cake. Goshawk Squadron. Absolutely brilliant. Superb writer. Unbelievably good. And he wrote a fantastic, but I think actually self-published and very overlooked book called A Splendid Little War about exactly this. It was about a volunteer RAF unit who were out fighting for the White Russians, and sort of in typical Derek Robinson style, don't really know why they're there, don't really care, just getting pissed, quite cross.
Yes. So that comes across as well in Anna Reid's book, that they've it's almost like an adventure.
Yeah.
And at the same time, they're all tired of war, and the whole thing is kind of corrupt, and it's all insane. And that really comes across very, very strongly in the book.
Brilliant, can't wait. Second book, that I'm putting on my Christmas list out of our ones we've done today. That's a
win.
Yeah, it's a win.
It's interesting how novels can really help you understand the history side of it, because that just that makes me think of a really good novel that I read about the phony war called Sword of Bone, written by a person who fought in the phony war, and it's all a great lark. They're all.
Was there any fighting in the phony war? Hang on.
Well, he's drinking champagne and eating oysters, and he's travelling through France.
What made you relate?
because he travels to the Maginot Line. Yeah, so this sounds like the kind of war I want to be involved in.
I mean,
and he's travelling around France with his great French mate, and they're having a whale of a time. Smart uniforms, women love them. And then it gets to May 1940 and it's not that funny anymore.
Yeah.
And so it helps you understand, I think, a little bit more than maybe sometimes a history book can convey that kind of stuff, but maybe not as well as a novel. Anyway.
It's a gateway drug to real history.
It is.
Or history's a gateway drug to the really top novels.
Yes, Antonia, very important to say that. Thank you. Right, where are we? Richard, you've only I think done how many?
No, he's done 2.
Well, 2.
Come on, don't be shy.
Well, as a sort of clever or clumsy link from what Roger was saying about kind of Russian encirclement, paranoia, and oppression, I dare say it started earlier with Napoleon's invasion, and they were the great kind of saviours of civilization from Napoleon, but everyone was a bit ungrateful and then turned upon him. And so that was 1812, which is the same year as Sharpe's Command. So Bernard Cornwell has another new book out, and although it's not the best Sharpe novel, I'd argue, kind of Bernard Cornwell, even not at his best, is still better than most, if not all. And I loved it. I mean, I read the Sharpe books when, I dare say, my teenage years. And this book's kind of set kind of mid chronology of the kind of Sharpe series, and it was great. It's very nostalgic. I mean, it had all the ingredients of the kind of Bernard Cornwell novel, and I actually felt like younger reading it. I just need a book that makes me feel slimmer, and then I don't think even Bernard Cornwell's capable of that. But in terms of a kind of stocking filler, a boy's own story. Just read another Sharpe book, whether it's this new one, Sharpe's Command, or go back and read one of the others. I think, did you reread Sharpe's Waterloo recently, Ollie?
I did. It's probably, I don't know, I keep on going through phases of which Sharpe is my favourite. I mean, Sharpe's such a great character. He is just so brilliantly, there's so much to him that... And funnily enough, developed by the TV show, which is, I mean, I loved Sharpe's Waterloo because that's the epic showdown between Wellington and Napoleon, and we're in Napoleon season with Ridley Scott's movie, which I've seen, and it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. We won't discuss the history behind it, but
it won't take long.
But Sharpe is just, any Sharpe is good, and Sharpe's Waterloo is not my favourite. My favourite is actually Sharpe's Company, I think, or Sharpe's Regiment.
I like the ones when he's in India.
Oh.
Yeah, they're good.
But can I just say,
but they're not right.
That was faint as anything.
I know. Did you hear that? But I would say Sharpe's Command. I read Sharpe's Command. I love Sharpe. I love Bernard Cornwell. Actually, if I had to pin my colours to the mast, Sharpe would not be actually my favourite Bernard Cornwell series. It would be Uhtred, Son of Uhtred.
Oh dear.
I know. Sorry. But we're gonna like literally fight it out afterwards. I'll have a broadsword, Ollie will have a musket or some shit. Oh no, a rifle! Christ, a rifle. Sharpe's Command was not a strong book in the oeuvre. But I agree with Richard. Bernard Cornwell writing at 70% of his capacity is still better than 99.5% of the people out there who want to be Bernard Cornwell. So read Sharpe's Command. It's great.
Yeah.
Great stuff. Right. I think, have we got any more to do? I think I've got one.
You've got one.
So I wanted to mention this because I think this is just on the cusp of when we were doing our books of the year at half time, halfway through the year. And I'd actually been thinking about this book a lot, particularly since October the 7th, because, the ongoing horrors in the Middle East, it's not directly comparable at all, because there are so many other different factors and history, I suppose. But Operation Chiffon by Peter Taylor, which describes the work of the intelligence services on the British side, working with, in particular, one man who risked his life from the Catholic community in Londonderry, in Northern Ireland. And so, as a result of this sort of 30-year-long process, we're a vital factor in reaching a peace agreement in Northern Ireland, which whilst many people, because this year is the 25th year of the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement, or the Belfast Agreement, is at the time people didn't think it would end, which is, I'm sure, what people think in the Middle East right now. So, it just requires people to take a risk. We've seen moderates in the Middle East being assassinated for wanting to take that risk, and unfortunately that's what it requires. In Northern Ireland, many people lost their lives, and Peter Taylor's book is brilliant at explaining the sort of secret side of what is needed in order to allow politicians to meet, and one hopes that that's happening at the moment, and it needs to happen if it isn't, because it's the only way you get out of this mess.
Ollie, that sounds brilliant, but my stocking's only so big. I haven't got room for... how am I going to pick that one as well?
You can get it on Kindle.
It does sound amazing.
Peter Taylor is a master journalist of Northern Ireland, and actually, I put some of my podcasts out on YouTube. This conversation with him blows everything out of the water.
Really?
Thousands and thousands of viewers of a only audible conversation. So yes, that's I think a little bit of a message of hope, maybe.
Yeah, I hope you're right. I mean, I think there was a sense of tiredness.
Thanks, Roger.
In Ireland and in Northern Ireland, which contributed to those conversations that were so important. War weariness.
But when
exactly.
do you get?
But when do we get to war weariness in the Middle East? It just seems to.
I have got a joke to insert. Hopefully I'll remember it correctly. So, Ronald Reagan and Gorbachev go to God and say, God, when will there be peace between the United States and the Soviet Union? And God says, there will be peace, but not in your lifetimes. And then we have Jerry Adams, and then Ian Paisley goes to God and says, God, will there ever be peace in Northern Ireland? And God says, there will be peace, but not in your lifetime. And then finally Ariel Sharon and Yasser Arafat goes to God and say, God, will there ever be peace in the Middle East? And God says, there will be peace, but not in my lifetime.
Yeah, but God, so true. It's not almost funny.
Well, on that happy note,
hang on, can I just say one more happy note?
Of course.
Just that I was talking to my daughter this morning. She's obsessed. She's 9. She's obsessed with Norse mythology, and she was talking about Valhalla. And I said, "Oh, would you like to go to Valhalla?" And she said, "Oh, I don't know, Mum. It's just a load of middle-aged blokes drinking beer and talking about war." And I think I've just been doing that for an hour and a half, and actually, it's quite fun. I'm in.
We're in Valhalla.
Oh yeah, we're in Valhalla.
Oh, that's a great way to end it. We have, despite the subject matter, listeners, we have had a great time talking about it. I hope you've enjoyed us listening. I just want to thank you very much for listening. I will put a list of all the books spoken about in the episode today in the show notes. That includes links, so you can go straight to them. There are links to episodes that we've spoken about as well, particularly the Nazi-Soviet pact that Roger and I had a great discussion on. And never forget that Roger was my first ever guest.
Never forget.
And he was so kind to me.
Wow.
Kind to you.
Generous and brilliant.
Listeners, thank you very much for listening, and plenty of great books out there. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you can forgive some of the guests for not paying attention to the mic that was sitting right in front of them. Links to all we discussed are in the show notes. Plenty more great history to come, including World War II Italy on Saturday with James Holland. Until then, thank you and good night.